Hey everyone! Thanks for checking out this follow-up to my SNK 40th Anniversary Collection review. Check that out if you haven't seen it yet, and in this video we're going to go through the Day 1 patch updates I mentioned in that video. We're also going to go through the DLC games that are coming up in December, and some other games I would have liked on the collection. Moving on, that Day 1 patch is out, and the collection comes out today, so let's go through the updates offered in the patch. First up are some bug fixes. There was an issue where the rewind feature could stop working. For me it happened when switching between games a lot. That does seem to be fixed now, so that's great. Also, NISPR has said that an audio issue with the NES games is fixed, and that a visual issue with the aspect ratio in some cases has been fixed too. So something that they didn't specifically call out for this patch, but I did notice it in there, are that there are some new options for the arcade games. Most arcade games offer options for when you can earn extra lives, and now allow you to use continues. Prehistoric Isle also allows you to turn on a stage select option, but it doesn't tell you how it works. I tried a ton of times, and I did get it to work one time in the Japanese version, but I couldn't get it again, so I gotta figure that out at some point. The biggest change with the patch though is the new control option. This fixes a huge complaint with the collection that I had in my review, which is that you can't play it with a single Joy-Con. In the unpatched version, you had to use both Joy-Cons or the Pro Controller for each player. I don't think you could even connect a single Joy-Con, so even the NES games that didn't need the second stick couldn't be played on the go, if you only had the two Joy-Cons. This update allows you to play every game with a single Joy-Con, so now you can use both Joy-Cons to play two players. This doesn't quite work as described though, so I need to update what I said in my review. The way these single Joy-Cons work is not like the NES games where you're always facing where you move. Instead, the four face buttons on the Joy-Cons act as the second stick. So you press the right button to aim right, or you press the top left to aim diagonally up and left, and yeah, you just kind of use that to kind of point where you're facing. This takes some real getting used to for the arcade games that use the rotary stick, especially when you need to use the bumpers for your secondary firing mechanics. But it does help keep the design of the original arcade games in place, allowing for moving and shooting in different directions. The other setting here really helps out for that, but it's also handy when using a Pro Controller if you prefer twin stick shooters, which is the auto fire setting. When this is turned off, the right stick or the face buttons aim, but you have to press one of the bumpers to shoot. When it's on, you shoot automatically when you use the right stick or face button, so it plays much more like a twin stick shooter does. As mentioned in my original review, NIS is releasing 11 free arcade titles being added on December 11th. These aren't out, so I haven't played them, but I did want to at least call out what they are and talk a bit about them. So in chronological order, let's go through these, starting with Ozma Wars, the arcade game from 1979. They call this SNK's first original game, but the museum shows that there were 3 games predating it. So, I mean, those are kind of clones, I guess, and this is their first fully original game. Historically, it's a really interesting title. Apart from apparently only being the second vertical shooter after Space Invaders, it's also the first game to include a health bar and distinct levels. In the game, your health is constantly draining, so you have to complete a level full of enemy spaceships and meteors to replenish it in between. The next game from 1980 is the arcade title Sasuke vs. Commander. This is an interesting take on the vertical shooting genre because it uses a ninja theme where the player moves along the bottom of the screen throwing ninja stars up at incoming enemies. The game is an early example of trying to add a small bit of narrative into games, and one of, if not the earliest examples of boss fights. Next up is Fantasy, an arcade game from 1981. SNK is going in the complete opposite direction for controls in this one because Fantasy is a game that uses no buttons, just the joystick to move around. The game is pretty unique though because it has 8 different stages, which each play like a completely different minigame. The objective in each is to dodge enemies and complete the objectives and move on, but they're all designed pretty differently. It's also considered the first game to have a continue option, and it's an example of an early game with an ending. Jumping to 1983, the next arcade game is Munch Mobile, or Joyful Road as it was known here. This is a vertical driving game that uses 2 joysticks. The first one steers the car to stay on the road and avoid obstacles, and the other one lets you use your long arms to grab items outside of your car, including food, gas, and money. Then a big jump, we're going from 83 straight to 87, and this is where the games before here were historically interesting, but these are where the games get good. So first up, a Bermuda Triangle from 1987. This has Sid, the ship from Alpha Mission, returning in a colorful shoot 'em up where you're traveling through time. It also used the rotary stick, so you move your ship separately and then you can fire in 8 different directions. The screen also scrolled forwards and backwards, which is pretty novel for this kind of game. There's a new set of power-ups that are a bit more standard instead of Alpha Mission's crazy power-up system. Following that, from the same year, is World Wars, which is pretty much a direct follow-up to Bermuda Triangle. This time you're traveling around the world instead of time, and your ship is smaller and more agile, so it looks a bit different, but gameplay-wise and the power-up systems are pretty similar. Then it's Time Soldiers, an interesting take on the Ikari Warriors formula that plays similar to that game. It has 2 players traveling through time to rescue their captured friends. You can go back and forth between time periods with the objective being the rescue instead of just progressing forward. I'm excited for this one because I enjoyed the Master System port of this game that no one ever talks about, and it isn't even mentioned in the museum, but I'm guessing that's because SNK didn't develop or publish it. Following that, a game I was surprised to see on here, but reading up about it, I'm actually really interested to try it, and that is Paddlemania, the arcade game from 1988. If you were wondering where all the sports games were, well, at least there's one here for you. And at first it seems pretty generic, but it's actually kind of interesting. It's a top-down tennis game with a bunch of interesting courts and opponents, including a sumo wrestler, surfers, and synchronized swimming teams. So it looks like it puts you up against a bunch of interesting challenges. The arcade game allowed for 4 players at once, so we'll see if this version does the same because none of the games on the cart support more than 2 players. Following that is Chopper 1, or The Legend of the Air Cavalry in Japan. This is a vertical shoot-'em-up where you fly a chopper, features power-ups and 3 different weapons, and I did a quick look on this, and I'm not really sure what's special about this one, or if it's just a great shoot-'em-up and that's why they included it. So this is one I'm interested to see how it plays. I mean, it looks good, it just kind of looks like a standard shoot-'em-up. And that brings us to the last 2 games, which, unlike the previous 9, are going to be released as DLC on the store. It's all free, it's just that the other 9 will be released in a patch, and these ones you'll have to actually go to the store to get. So, moving into 1989, we get Beast Busters. This is an arcade game with mounted guns. It's a spiritual follow-up to Mechanized Attack, but it uses horror and monsters instead of mechs for its themes. These games have you move a cursor around the screen, and in first person, you shoot at different attacking enemies. The original arcade machine had 3 guns, so I hope this version accounts for 3 players too. We'll have to wait and see. And the last game is SAR Search and Rescue. This is the last rotary stick game developed by SNK, and it's another take on Akari Warriors, but it looks interesting. It uses a sci-fi alien theme and breaks up the action into several rooms and smaller areas so the player can run into rooms to avoid enemies. It's a cool inclusion so you can see kind of where they finally ended up with this rotary stick idea. Yeah, so SNK isn't the most well-known developer or publisher, but this set of games really showcases the significant contributions they made to video games. Most of the earlier games were designed in a way that many companies would follow later and that they used to design their Neo Geo arcade machines, where the idea was to make games that could easily reuse existing hardware. So it's awesome to see that these games are included as I look back at that, which, as I tried to say in the review, is one of the things that makes this collection so special. For those who don't really care about that stuff though, over half of the editions here look like they're a ton of fun and worth replaying several times, so overall it's a great update to the collection. That brings the total game count up to 30, which, considering SNK only released 64 games before the Neo Geo, that's a pretty impressive set for the collection. So this isn't a complaint so much as just like a bit of a wishful thinking, but no collection can be released without someone saying there was something left off. And while for the price I think this is a great set, there are some omissions that I would have loved to have seen on here. The first big one is Mechanized Attack. Both the arcade and NES versions would have been really nice on here, especially because that would mean that all of SNK's non-sports NES games would be on this collection. It also would have made a great companion to play back-to-back with Beast Busters. And the beat-em-up Gang Wars would be a ton of fun on here too. That was released as a PS3 mini, and I think it would just be a nice way to round out this collection with another beat-em-up kind of game. Lastly, there were 6 games on the PSP SNK Classics Volume 0 collection that aren't on here, and several games that were released as PS3 minis that also aren't. Now I understand this is new emulation on a new console, and I shouldn't really be that greedy, but the picky completionist in me can't help but mention it. So that wraps it up. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but this is a spectacular collection for fans like me, and even if you're not into retro and arcade games, it's an amazing offering for the Switch, for something that you can just pick up quick and play a whole bunch of quick games on the go, especially now that the patch is in for single Joy-Con support. You can take these and play them with your friends. I highly recommend it. So thanks for checking out this review, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.